Oh, welcome back, everyone, to the Yosan University 39 Gen podcast. I have a really awesome guest with me today. Would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Michael Berletich. I am recently a faculty member at Yosan since September of last year, and have been really loving it. I find Yosan to be the right kind of place, if that makes sense. It has all the right elements of what is needed, and from the top to the bottom. And so I just feels like a place to come home to, really, in a way. I I am a professor of Chinese medicine and a practitioner, a clinician. I have been practicing for about 25 years and teaching Chinese medicine for about 23. And I have been a teacher for as long as I can remember. Just Chinese medicine is the thing I'm doing mostly now. And I taught for about 23 years at the Oregon College of Oriental Medicine in Portland. It's now defunct. It ran ashore, but I was the dean of faculty there. I basically started as a teaching assistant, worked my way up to dean of faculty over 23 years. So I have a deep love of teaching. It's my favorite thing. I'm also a musician and play music regularly and write music, and have written about 150 songs and just put out a new record recently. So a solo album I think is fantastic. But yeah, that's kind of the story in a nutshell, I guess. I like to think of myself a little bit as a scholar, as a mild scholar, I call myself.
That's amazing. That's a lot.
I was thinking about this recently. I had a patient years ago. I still have them, but years ago, a patient of mine had said to me that they knew that I was a musician and I was a practitioner. And one day she had said, I used to think that you were a doctor moonlighting as a musician, but now I realize you're a musician who moonlights as a doctor. So I thought that was a nice compliment anyways.
That's beautiful. And you're not alone in that. Look at Dr. Hoffman at Yosan, who is this accomplished music producer, and there are people, right? There are so many people out there that have these other things, but yet at the core, they feel called to the medicine and called to helping people. What was it that called you to this path of healing and medicine?
Well, I don't know, if you ask the astrologer, maybe they'll say it was always in my chart or something. The wound Chiron, the wounded healer, sits in a prominent position in my chart, I guess. But I didn't know anything about that at the time. I had been going to college initially, and I didn't like any of the degree choices that I had to choose from. So I forged my own degree in mythology. I was a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and I loved the ideas that he was talking about and just the interconnectedness of things and the story of things. And I was studying that, and somehow through the process of, in California, budget cuts, they trimmed off some of the things that I needed for my program. And I ended up switching my degree to be what it was called ethnoecology, which is ecology, but how people lived in their environments, like how they defined themselves through their environment, how their environment defined them. So it was, a very useful degree in the modern age, of course. But and I had a dual degree in English. But part of what happened was that I had, years before that, even been really sick. I was working as a teacher and as a caregiver on this ranch. It was like a 100-acre ranch in Northern California, and where boys 17 down to 7 were remanded there because they had no parents, they were wards of the court. And so they were kind of put there to be educated and taken care of. And it was a pretty tough job, with those. I mean, it was the first weekend I was spit on, bitten, peed on, punched. It was a tough job that first week. And after about 2 weeks in, I got sick, and I was sick for a while, and I wasn't getting better. My boss kind of said, "Hey, can you just go to the doctor at least and get checked out? We don't mind if you're sick or whatever, but kind of, need to know, like, what's your ETA for going back to work." And I went, but I spent, an hour in the doctor's office, which was really about 8 minutes with the doctor. And he kind of grabbed my throat and was like, "You probably have a virus. Here's this prescription. But if you're not better in 2 weeks, come back." And I left there, and I was driving away, and a friend of mine called, and they said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm still sick. I went to the doctor. It was useless." And he said, "You ought to go see this acupuncturist that I know." And so I got the number. I made a call, went to see this acupuncturist. She spent like 2 hours with me. I walked in feeling terrible, walked out feeling great. So that got the idea in my head. And then when I was studying, like I said, this degree in ethnoecology, there was a teacher at the college who was from China, and he taught psychology, but he was an practicing acupuncturist back home, Chinese medicine doctor back home. And he, for his own interest, decided to teach a course in Chinese medicine. And I had been living with these Native American people for many years, learning with them. This person who was a medicine person is what they would call themselves, and who did healings for people. And, I was always like, I want to do that, because I saw them do things that were just amazing and incredible, like things that are hard to believe, people that were in a wheelchair, and like they'd come in and like he'd do his thing and sing this stuff, and then they'd get up and be okay. And, people that had all kinds of things, just more stories that I could even begin to tell. And I was really attracted to that idea of doing that. So at the time I took this course, and I was amazed at how similar Chinese medicine was to the teachings that my Native American teachers were teaching me. They were like one-to-one. They were like the same. They were contextually like different languages, of course, but they were basically the same stuff. And that got me really attracted. That and the experience that I'd had previously of someone treating me and I'm feeling better kind of led me to it. But I looked into Chinese medicine at the time, and I was like, it doesn't look like something I really want to do. But I kept it in the back of my mind. And then I was playing music, and I had a chance to go to school and study Chinese medicine. And it was like there was a big tour of the East Coast, or there was go to school, and I think I'll just go on tour. Sounds funner. So I put it off again for a few more years. And then eventually I was living in Europe, and I was in Europe studying environmental science again, and at Trinity College in Ireland, in Dublin. And I went out one night with some friends of mine. One was my friend Kareem, who was from Palestine, and another was my friend Dave, who was from Pennsylvania, and they were studying medicine at Trinity. And we were out drinking one night in the pub, and I said to Kareem, like, "Aren't you and Dave at the same program, the same level?" And because Dave is always hanging out, you never have any free time. And he said, "Well, Dave just does what he needs to do to get by, and then he likes to hang out and have his pints of beer and relax. Like, I've wanted to be a doctor my entire life. It's all I've ever wanted to do. And the only way I think I can really learn to be that is if I spend all the time I can with the other doctors learning." And then he said, "It's like you." He's like, "You came all this way to study this environmental science, and do all this stuff." And it was like, in the moment, it hit me like I was not doing what was passionate to me. I believe strongly in the environment and fixing the environment and fixing the world, but I don't, I spent a lot of time rebuilding streams and planting wetlands and doing all kinds of work. And then the first rain comes after they build a 100 housing development, and it all gets washed away. And I was like, nature doesn't need to be fixed. Human beings need to fix their relationship to nature. And that's what got me pushed back towards medicine, is like the kind of the disillusionment of working in the environment and seeing it not really making that big of a difference, and realizing it was really more people that need to be corrected, how they're living, how we are living, how I'm living. And then once that correction is made, the environment should be fine. Yeah, something along this line. And that's what ended up leading me back to school. I withdrew from Trinity. It's kind of a funny story. Like, I was already in school. It was like, 6 weeks in. And I had this conversation with them on the Friday night. Saturday, I went out for this long walk along the coast trying to decide what I wanted to do. And then that night I had a dream. And in the dream, I met this person who was sitting in an office and told me that it was great that I'd come to study with them. So then on Monday, I woke up, I went to the college, and I asked the registrar, like, could I, can I withdraw from school, and what would happen if I did? And she was like, well, if you withdraw by 3:00 today, you'd get a full refund. But after that, you only get half. And I was like, kind of, okay. And so I went and looked for a travel ticket home, found one for like $170 or something, at the Use It travel office. It was like 6 weeks later. And so then I ended up withdrawing and coming back here. And when I got back to the States, I immediately met one of my major teachers who was like, it's good that you've come to study with me. Let's go. And every kind of door is open since then. So I felt like it was the right choice.
Two things about that story that are really interesting. The first of them being looking at the environment and ecology and talking about shifting that look a little bit back to the human landscape. That, we're talking about the environment and humans are out of balance with nature. Well, we're out of balance with ourselves. And it's very interesting because that's a very TCM, or Chinese medical concept that, when you get this imbalance, things start going wrong. And it's interesting that you changed away from environmental science, but you're still dealing with the same concepts, this restoring of balance and restoring to wellness that comes from this internal cultivation,
Absolutely. For me, in my understanding of Chinese medicine, and there is no difference between nature and the human being, in the sense that whatever is in nature, whatever's going on in nature is going on in here. That's the maximum. The maxim that we all know is this: as above, so below. But the second half of that maxim is often left out of it. Most people know the as above, so below, but the actual second half of that says as above, so below, as within, so without. So that it means that those two things are simultaneous. It's out there, so then it's in here. It's in here, so it's out there simultaneously. It's more quantum in that sense. And and I think that that's the main thing that I try to teach all the students. In fact, I was just saying this last night at teaching at Yosan. I teach online there, but I was teaching the students. I was saying that, anytime that you're confused about concept in Chinese medicine, try not to think of it in Chinese medicine terms. Try to think of it in the real world. Like, what would nature do, or how would that exist as a problem in nature? And then what would nature do to correct it? It'll make it easier to understand, because you're thinking of it as if it's something that's outside of you. It's very similar to the idea that I believe and that I teach students a lot, which is that Chinese medicine isn't something that's outside of you or that's in a book. Like, I got all kinds of books on Chinese medicine here behind me, and there's certainly a lot of wisdom and knowledge in those books. But the knowledge and the medicine isn't in those books. The medicine's actually inside of us. So it's more about waking that up and remembering it, like remembering what's inside of you that was already placed inside of you just by the fact that you're a human being. You wake up to that, and there's the medicine. Like, this is a concept that I think strongly about or believe in.
With that, the there's so often I hear students of Chinese medicine describing this feeling of this just makes sense. Or like you said earlier, when you came to Yosan, it felt like you were coming home. There's this idea of this understanding. Like when I got really sick, I took a sabbatical from school and I got really sick. And as I was working with my acupuncturist, who I actually interviewed on this podcast to help me regain my health, I kind of leaned in on the Shanghan Lun because it described what I was dealing with, where I couldn't find all these other things. And I was like, this right here, this makes sense. This is how this moved. This is how I got sick. And I was talking to my Western MD and they're like, yeah, it sounds like you're talking crazy talk. You know, I don't know what you're talking about, a pathogen going deeper, but I experienced it. I felt it. I knew what was happening. And then by applying the principles there, we were able to work it out and I got better. But it was something that was very much it made sense.
This is something that I talk to students and patients about all the time, or well, students primarily, trying to train people how to be great practitioners, like, is that the patient will always tell you exactly what's going on. They'll tell you exactly what they need, exactly what's going on. Not so much in like definitive, oh, I need, spleen 3 or something, or sometimes they will say, but I have this, but they'll talk in symbolic language of what's going on for them. So as long as you can interpret, and of course, Chinese is a symbolic language. So as long as you can translate their symbolic statements into something useful, then you can help them. Like I had a patient once who came, they were referred to me by their psychologist. I treat a lot of PTSD and I treat a lot of chronic types of diseases, a lot of mental, emotional issues. It wasn't like I set out to do that initially. It's just how it evolved and what happened, kind of thing. But this patient came and they were really reluctant to talk at all. And about anything. And I said, well, like you're coming because you're having some digestive issues. At least that's what you wrote on the thing here. Can you describe what that feels like or what that is like to you? And the person said, well, they didn't say anything for a second. They sat there quietly. And I was it was almost so long that I was like, should I say something or not? And I didn't. And then after another minute or so, the person said, you know what? I wish that I was a snake and I could just eat once a month. And then I'd be okay. And I thought exactly what you said just a minute ago. If that person was with their Western doctor and said that information would be most likely very little very little use. It would have very little meaning. And to me, it was like the epitome of exactly what the person needs. Like, I mean, if we go into Chinese cosmology, the snake is the organ of the spleen. The spleen is the organ of digestion. The spleen is the organ of transformation. The spleen is the organ of change. The spleen is the organ that's sending everything. The heart, so the heart can be clear. This person had an anxiety and an emotional disorder over traumatic things that happened that they'd eaten and didn't want to eat. And it was like, in short order, in one sentence, they basically summed up for me everything that they needed on a certain level. And once I had that, I was like, okay, because they didn't want to talk anymore. They were talking to them and doing some intake wasn't going to get me anywhere. So we started with that and we went, and it was great. You were talking like about what I said about Yosan. Part of it is that Yosan, it's like what Okam used to be before it got too big for its britches. Okam was ranked as like whatever the number one school in the country for years. It was a nice small knit community, and then somehow the president thought being the best wasn't good enough. We should be better than the best, and they picked up and kind of invoked this whole craziness to now where it doesn't even exist anymore. But the first time I walked into into Yosan, it reminded me of what it was like to be in that original place, in that original time. Like it just seemed like the right place. It just has that vibe to it. So it, uh, those things, it's like anything else. It's not arbitrary, right? It's like you kind of see it and you go, okay, there's nothing. I always tell students, there's nothing arbitrary in Chinese medicine, right? It all means something, and clearly your story is exemplary of that, right? You knew what was going on. You talked to your practitioner. I think that practitioner. I think I've seen that because I've pretty much watched all of your podcasts that I could. I found them fascinating. So it's a great honor for me to be here because you've had some pretty heavy hitters on here saying some really amazing things. So yeah, it's been fascinating. I was really awed by Zev and Brant. Zev was speaking my language. I was like, I just loved what he was saying. Brant the same way. I love that idea that Brant was talking about of, and it's very important to learning Chinese medicine. And I want to say it so that if people haven't heard that podcast, they go back and listen to it, but they also hear it here, which is that Chinese medicine is taught in the modern age as a pathological solution, but it is not a pathological medicine thing. It's actually what Brant was saying is trying to not pathologize his patients, right? He was talking about this in his podcast with you. And I think that's one of the hardest things for students to learn is that it's not about the pathology that the person has. It's about restoring the physiology that should be there. And then the pathology doesn't exist because pathology and physiology are the same thing. It's like a coin. One side's heads and one side's tails, or whatever denomination of money you're using. If we're in the US, it's heads and tails, so it's like it's still the same coin no matter which side you're looking at it. One side's the pathology, one side's the physiology. And if I ask a student a question, they can I would bet money every time that they will answer from a pathological point of view. But the medicine is not pathologizing anything. It's just recognizing when something has shifted from physiology to pathology. The number one place we mislearn this is right out of the gate when we learn something called, quote, the 6 evils. And that plants the wrong seed right away in the mind of the practitioner. Because if you actually look at the Chinese name of those things, it's called Liu Qi, meaning the 6 Qi. So then technically, if you translate that as the 6 evils, Qi would be evil, and that's your life force. That's the thing that keeps you alive. So it can't be translating that. It means the 6 things that are outside that can become pathological, but are not. Like if you were in the desert and I came up with a water truck, that water wouldn't be a pathology. It would be your saving grace, But if I came up with a fan blowing hot air, that you'd be like, beat it, man, get out of here. I don't need that, So it's what one person's savior is another person's pathology, right? In that sense. So I think that's one of the harder things for students to kind of learn maybe is that it's not a pathology. And I was so taken by Brant. He's very much more eloquent than I am in speaking about it, but it was great. I loved listening to it.
There's something that you reminded me of is like, say it is such a mindset shift, because imagine that I don't fill my car up with oil and I'm driving around town and suddenly my engine starts to make funny noises. Well, you could sit there and go, well, you are having engine problems. But the reality is that no, you're not. What's happening is you're running your car without oil, and you have to look at this. The correct functioning is not happening. If I go to make my daughter a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and I just slather it with peanut butter and forget to put the jelly, she's going to suddenly look at it and go, this is a horrible sandwich. The reality is that the correct function of something is not is not being played out, and that you have to have that understanding of the correct way things fit in order. This normal physiology, and maybe correct isn't the right word, but the optimal way that things flow together.
Well, correct is one way to say it, because we would call like Zheng, right? Zheng, Zheng, like a Zhengqi, or you're upright. Like that's nature functions this way. It's upright. It doesn't have a non-upright function, right? It may appear to be bad, like that peanut butter sandwich appears to be bad to your daughter because it doesn't have the jelly, but someone on the street corner starving is like, that's the greatest sandwich I've ever had. Thank you so much. And so again, it's about context, which is exactly what Chinese medicine is, and what Chinese, its language itself is. It's all completely contextual, right? It's all a bunch of sounds and symbols that sound alike and have similar intertwining meanings. And once we start to learn it in this way, then we have a better understanding of it. I think it's the hardest part for students, like you said, is to recognize this. But it's also because in Chinese medicine, school, having been in institutional settings now for, like 25 years, and I think all the schools do a basically decent job of trying to teach it, but it's a circular system that's trying to be taught as if it were a straight line. And that is problematic because the people that are walking the straight line don't understand they're looking at a circle. And so they don't, students often say, well, I was in such and such class and so said blah, blah, blah. But you just said the opposite of blah, blah, blah. And which one's true? And I'm like, yes, they're both true. And they're like, how can that be? Because in our Western world, it's either this or that. It's not both, right? But in Chinese medicine, it's both. It is both of those things. And the meaning is encapsulated in the theory, and the theory is more than what we're taught it is. Like, I always think of Chinese medicine theory in school is kind of like, like if I said, mouse, book, light, brick, tree, cloud, painting, guitar string, turntable. And then I said, what does it mean? You'd be like, I have no idea, but that's kind of how we teach theory in a certain kind of way, as we teach random pieces. And then somehow later it will all make sense to us, right? Like if we just wait long enough, it'll all make sense in a certain kind of way. So one of the things I did way back at OCOM when I was first starting to teach was create a course that was more about understanding the theory. And the great thing about it was when I started to create that course, the place I went to for understanding how to create that was with Qigong Ni. Like, they were the person who I never met, but they were the person through what they taught me the stuff that I needed to know, basically. Them and my teachers, the teachers that I actually had physically in person. So it's always the part of like what I meant when I said walking into Yosan felt like coming home. It was like, I've been teaching Qigong Ni's material and Mao Xing Ni's material for 25 years, never met them or didn't even know that I knew they were in LA. I knew that they had written books, but I didn't know about the school or anything at that time. And it's kind of funny in an interesting way how that circle kind of completes itself. It's
There was this great study of, and this was on something, a great TV show called Through the Wormhole, and Morgan Freeman narrated it, and it was of scientific studies of phenomenon that were hard to explain or very interesting. And then they talked about this one study where the monkeys in Japan, the snow monkeys were all developing a new trait. One of the interesting things about these snow monkeys is that everyone will watch these videos of these snow monkeys sitting in the hot tubs. And they just sit in the hot springs, natural hot springs, and soak in the wintertime. Why? Because it's so cold. And they learned that, hey, we can stay warm by sitting in these hot springs. One of the things that was interesting is that the monkeys on the southern end of the island of Hokkaido picked up this trait first. Now, the southern end of the island and the northern end of the island, the monkeys in the two population areas are not connected. But what researchers noticed is that when the monkeys on the southern end developed this trait, the monkeys in the northern end, who did not have the tourists that were coming into the hot springs to see, also started doing the same trait at the same time. And one of the things that the scientists could postulate was like, it's this beautiful chance that just happens, or there is seemingly some type of intelligence or Tao or thing that is operating behind the scenes, And so,
or some type of interconnectivity that exists that we can tap into, right? Like something that's, I think of it in a way, like in the modern, like something quantum, right? In this way of where it's like, if you look at, it's always evolving and changing, but, like what's the big quantum mechanics stuff that's kind of out there now? It's like this string theory and these types of theories that are out there. And if you look at all of that, what they're trying to talk about or what they're trying to describe, and you just look at Chinese medicine, it's as if science is finally catching up back to Chinese medicine that already kind of had those thinkings already, right? That it was interconnected. Like it's that same principle you're talking about would be like, why can you put an acupuncture needle in at somewhere on the foot and see a place in the brain light up that has no pathway to that place? There isn't any pathway that science, quote, knows of between that place and that brain. Why does it light up there? Right? Like now science recently, quote, discovered this plane of existence, the empty space that's there, right? That somehow, because they couldn't see it because on microscope slides, right, they were squishing that space. And now with different microscopes, they go, oh, wait, there's this space that was always there that we just never could see before. And that's kind of this nature of in the body, that's the triple warmer, the empty space of the body, right? In the Tao Te Ching, that's where all the life is, right? Like chapter 11, the Tao Te Ching, right? It says, the 30 spokes converge around a central hub of a wheel, but it's the empty space that makes the wheel turn. A cup has a hole at the top and sides, but it's the empty space that makes the cup useful. We're in a room here with walls and windows, but it's the empty space inside that makes it habitable, like that. So it's that empty space where when something has empty space, it has life, is what it says, right? So there's something, I think, deeply embedded in what you're saying there for those monkeys. It's kind of reminds me of that 100th monkey principle, which supposedly the nuclear movement was using, but then somehow it was supposedly debunked or something. Didn't really happen, but sounds like it actually probably really was happening. Just made up the way they said it was or something. So
what can students that are learning this medicine do to become great practitioners?
I think one of the most important things, well, usually when I'm talking to students, I try to give them a lot of understanding because I know how hard it is, like you do. We've been students, we know what it's like to go through it, learning it, right? And we know the deep desire to want to know it. Like, I don't know a single student, well, that's not entirely true, but 99% of the students really want to know it. They really, in their hearts, really want to know it. And it's difficult. One of the things I say is that it should be difficult because that's what makes it worth it. Like if it's easy, if it's not, if it didn't require struggle and effort, it's like some, pen or whatever it's my favorite pen, but if I leave it at Starbucks, the world's not going to end. Oh, oops, I left it there. Like, like you have to really earn it, work for it. Like my glasses are fairly expensive. I try to make sure I know where they are at all times, right? Otherwise, I'm like, can't see anything. So I think it should be difficult. But one of the things that is needed is time. When you start out in school, the understanding is that they don't tell you that the medicine is a living thing and that it's actually inside of you and it needs to be woken up, as opposed to something you're going to read and suddenly get it outside of you, right? It's like I said before, you're waking something up that already exists within you. And if you're being called to it, then there's a calling to it. There's a lineage that's calling you to join into the slipstream of the lineage that's been going on how far back, right? Like this type of thing. So when you start school, and I think what I say is that the medicine, the first thing it starts doing is it looks in you and tries to find all of your impediments to carrying the medicine forward. What are your impediments to carrying it forward? And then it's going to try to help you. It's going to point those out. And that can be difficult because a lot of people come to Chinese medicine or to medicine in general, maybe because they are wounded themselves. And so they're seeking some type of healing, right? Like you were telling your story saying, right? So what is it that how can I help myself? I got sick in the process, something like this, right? So there's a part of that for all of us probably. And so one thing is you're not who you were and you're not who you're going to be, but whoever you are is required to be somewhere at all times and perform and take tests and do stuff. That's like schizophrenia, in a way, it's like, so the school kind of makes you crazy. So you have to wear yourself through that. So you ask, what would I tell students? One of the things I would say is you need to do something that's going to help you be steady and centered through the process. And the number one thing that there is for that is something we should be learning in every school, which is what's called Qigong, right? Qi work. And Qi means Qi or life force or breath. So on a literal level, it means breathing. Like you and I are sitting here talking, how well are we breathing right now while we're talking? Are we taking nice, slow, deep, even breaths while we're here? Or are we just kind of breathing so that we can, because we're talking and, it's not as easy as so that Qi means breath and life force. Gong means to work, but it doesn't just mean work like go out and labor. It does mean that, but it also means like a specialized worker, like someone who's able to do it. So that's like Qigong, you have to fake it till you make it, right? You have to kind of do the breathing until you actually feel something happening. And then once you have something actually happening, now you're getting more to Gong, like work, right? Like this type of thing. And so I say that people should do Qigong, two reasons. One is because you are draining yourself constantly. You're constantly trying to like take in more and do more and do more and do more and push yourself more. And it's a grueling program. Like we're learning about holistic medicine in the most unholistic way possible, right? Like, so there's that part of it. So you've got to protect yourself and take care of yourself, because if you don't learn how to do it for yourself, how are you going to be preaching to do it to someone else on a certain level, right? So one, you want to do that, keep your energy up. So, rest and eat right and all that stuff. But doing Qigong actually helps your energy stay steady, stable, calm, keeps you from getting sick as much and things like that. It keeps when you sit all the time, it keeps your channels open and your body moving and, like the flow happening. There's this character in Chinese called Tong, and Tong means free, flowing, and unblocked. It's one of the most important characters that there is in Chinese medicine. Like that's what we're all striving for our patients, to keep them free flowing and unblocked. And then everything's going to be okay, right? So one is actually doing it helps your physical, mental, emotional, and ultimately spiritual body by keeping it in a better state. But the other part of why it's important to do it is because, as I said, it's my belief that the medicine isn't something that you actually find outside of you and then put in. It's something that is already there. There's an inherent design already in there, and you're waking that up. And so the more that you do that Qigong, the more you open up your meridians, the more you can both find it within, and all that stuff and all those books behind me that we're reading has space to go into. Right? Like Qigong is like opening up the meridians, opening up the channels, opening up the flow. So then the more that you can do that kind of stuff, the more space you create for the medicine to have a place to be in. It's like, this cup here, I filled this cup up with tea before we started. It's a big cup. It'll hopefully last the whole interview, right? Like if I got a little teeny, espresso cup and filled that up, it wouldn't have lasted very long. So I want to make my cup as big as I can for containing the medicine, right? And that kind of way.
There was something that you said there that I've taught language for a long time. And one of the things that when people come in to learn a language, they have this belief or desire to have it be fast. I'm going to learn this language in 2 days. And learning the language isn't like that. It takes time. It takes time to allow this to get into the nooks and crannies. But one of the things that I like that you're saying, and I have always said this as well, language doesn't come from without. We learn words, we learn things that help us frame thoughts. But the reality is our desire to communicate, our desire to express things is always there. That is the beauty of who we are. And I feel like what you're saying is a similar thing. The medicine is there. We are simply learning the language to express it.
Yeah. And part of it is going back to something we said before, we were talking about nature and how far human beings have removed themselves from it. In a way, like, you were talking about the Shangham earlier, right? And it describes this pathogen moving inward very eloquent and very clearly. But it also is talking about a time in nature when humans were much closer to it and much more affected by it on a certain level. Like, now we are affected in the same ways by air conditioners blowing on the back of our head, but we don't think of it the same way, right? In a certain kind of way. Like people, I can't tell you how much when I was in clinic as a student, I would always be in the clinic and there'd always be some air conditioner blowing on my head. And I'd always have a headache by the time I was done with the shift. It'd be partly from not drinking enough water and partly from, eating poorly and partly just the wind blowing on my head while I'm standing there, busy trying to do something else and not protecting myself from it in a certain kind of way. So I think that the more that we can recognize that nature itself is Chinese medicine, as above, so below, whatever's going on in nature, like where are we now? You're maybe in the same hemisphere or different hemisphere, but certainly I think you're closer to the equator. It might be warmer where you are, right? We're February, whatever it is today, the 20th, I think, something around there. And that means we're almost 3 weeks into the spring. Li Chun, the start of spring, was February 3rd this year. So where are we energetically in nature? What's going on with patients? What's happening in nature? Why does every patient that comes in seem frustrated, irritable, pent up, kind of like, cold, or have some kind of throat Shaoyangi type of thing? Well, doesn't that sound like exactly where we are with what we would expect? That's exactly what the Shaolin's telling you. And this medicine is time and space medicine. So another thing I might tell students is expand the way that you think about the medicine. It's time and space medicine. It's Jing Qi Shen medicine, which means past, present, and future medicine, which means whatever happened in the past is affecting me in the now and will determine the future in a certain kind of way unless I do the steps to shift that and change that. The future isn't what we think it is. It becomes what we think it is, right? This type of thing. So then what do we think? Like if the person comes in and is identified with their disease, then how are you going to unidentify them with that so that they can actually live without it? Right?
Yeah.
The other part of it becomes how not to take all that on as somehow your responsibility, right? In the way, in the practice.
Which comes back to the importance of Qigong and the self-cultivation, the importance of healing yourself.
Yeah, it'd be going into your clinic room, both, how do you go into the clinic room open and safe?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you go into the clinic room open to whatever the person needs, but not absorbing their energy, absorbing their illness? A lot of times when you're a young student and you're starting out, you kind of start out, you go in, you treat someone with shoulder pain, you go home, oh, I got shoulder pain. You treat someone with sore throat, you go home, I got a sore throat. It's like, yeah, because you shouldn't be using your chi to help them. You should be a conduit for the chi of the universe. If I go back to my Native American teachers, the healers that I was working with, when I asked them what they were doing, how they were able to heal someone, every single one of them, because I had 4 different ones from different places, but every single one of them would say, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just a conduit for a spiritual being who is able to do that. And that being talks to me or sings to me or comes through me and does that, tells me what to say and what to do, and it gets it done. They're the ones that are doing it. And so in a way, who's doing that healing? Well, nature's doing that healing then in a certain way. You cut your finger, where does that healing come from? Right? That healing is coming from inside of us. Where is it coming from inside of us? So if you're standing there doing Qigong or you're doing Tai Chi, what does Tai Chi mean? Tai Chi means the supreme ultimate, but what does that mean? Right? Tai Chi is you. You, the person, become the Ji, meaning the central pole that is connecting heaven and earth, and you're standing at the center. When you're standing there in the, quote, horse stance, right, doing Qigong, the horse is the animal of, we talked about the snake being the animal of the spleen. What's the horse the animal of? The horse is the animal of the heart. So when you're standing in the horse stance, you're actually standing in the heart stance, which means you're standing in the stance of oneness. The heart is remembering that it's one, right? The heart says, I am one, I am one, I am one, I am one. That's its mantra all the time. That's what it's saying. And so when I'm standing in that space, I'm one. Where am I at? I'm at the center. Wherever I am, I'm standing at the center of the world, literally. Where's the center of the world? It's in me. Where's the center of the world? It's in you. Where, right now. How can it be both things simultaneously? Well, it is. And we're both connected to the center, which is the center of the universe, center of the Big Bang, where the energy is expanding out from the center, right? So then every time you stick your needle in, boom, you're trying to touch that healing force. Wake that up, that Jung, that upright force that's coming from the center. You're putting your needle into where? I mean, I'm asking the audience, where are you putting your needles in when you fit in? Like, theoretically, you're putting it in the chi, but if we took an X-Acto knife and we peeled it away, could we find the chi there? Like, how do we know? Do we rely on the patient to tell us that's in the chi? Like, how do they know what the chi is? Like, how do you know that it's in there? Aren't you trying to put that needle into the very center of literally the healing force and wake that up, which is the center of a point? Every single point is telling a story. There's 365 points, one for every single day, one for every story that anybody could ever tell you. That's why it's so important. Another thing I'll tell the students is learn your point names, not the numbers. I mean, you got to learn the numbers to pass your test or boards or whatever, but the number tells you nothing. I always say about the points are always saying, I am not a number, I'm a free point. Um, so again, that healing force, when we cut ourselves, we can plan that we're going to heal. So then how do I, as a practitioner, help that patient to re-engage that healing force within them, whether it's headaches, menses problems, ulcerative colitis, cancer, whatever it is that they have going on? How do we help them find that? Like my teachers would say, I'm just the conduit of it. I'm just the doorway through which it happens. I don't use my own chi for that. I'm letting the chi of the universe kind of come through me, which means then back, like you said, back to we got to have a space with which it can work inside of us, right? Like this. So I think, yeah, we're on something there, maybe.